Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox. Welcome to Gumi Economics 201. That's right, we are getting into 200 levels of Gumi Economics. And, well, this episode is going to look back at kind of some recent observations, and also we're going to talk a little bit about the FFBE games in general. Just in case anybody doesn't end up liking the rest of this video and wants to click off at any time, I want to make sure that you get one good actionable piece of information from this video. So, since I unfortunately deleted my YouTube post about this from earlier, there are a few things that I would like to say about planning for the future and job-based VCs and which ones to think about maybe actually picking up. Instead of talking about individual VCs, I want to talk about these by job class, so you can just kind of keep an eye out for particular job classes and think about kind of which of these jobs you might want to build a team from. Especially if elemental resistance or elemental chain resistance becomes a more common thing in the future, then weapon type or damage type chaining is going to become a lot more common, which is definitely going to help job-based VC teams that are kind of one job type. So who has 6 at this point, you ask? Well, we've already talked about strike, and in a previous video I've talked about gloves, so I won't linger on either of those. But the other 2 that have 6 now are axe, actually, which is something that I complained about in an earlier video, but looking at the meta right now, it's pretty limited, but potentially Moraga, Vega, and, look, if we could somehow in the middle of March get a Summer Kilfay 140, we could have 3 good axe units. I don't know, maybe Sorel 140 would be interesting. I'm not really sure. There aren't a lot of good axe units in the game, so that having 6 probably isn't amazing. But I've got to say that if you put a tank and 2 amazing tank busters like Summer Kilfay and Vega and a good tank together, that's going to mess a lot of people up because they're going to be one-shotting people from behind the safety of big old thick boy Moraga. So that's going to be quite special. And the last job is Mace. That's right. Mace already has 6. Now you might be thinking, I can't think of any really great Mace units. And you know what? I can't think of any off the top of my head either. Maybe if I was looking at that tier list right now, I might be able to spot a couple towards the top. But I'm not looking at that tier list right now, and I really can't think of any. But I can think of one that's coming in the future, the next Warrior of the Crystal, who is probably due within like the next month in JP, is definitely a dark Mace unit. So, you know, she's definitely also going to get a Mace VC like right after she comes out, for sure. So that's going to be a 7th Mace VC, and, you know, maybe you want to start thinking about your Mace-based RAF team and maybe start looking at Mace-based vision cards if you're excited for her. Or you could stick with your dark vision cards and just pull Sephiroth to go with her. That's also perfectly valid and probably just as effective. Actually, let me look at this tier list. Mace users. Mace. Macherie. Also Queen Macherie, come to think of it. So that's in between S and S+. Surprisingly, for old Macherie, and I've seen some of the footage to back this idea up. She is actually surprisingly formidable because of how tanky she can become when reincarnated enough. Halloween Little Leela in the A+ class. Also Ildira in the A+ class. Yeah. That's not a lot of friends. So I mean, Team Rafu and 2 Macherie might be really interesting. That's probably the most powerful team. Like, I'm seeing them, they're higher in the ranks. But, like, yeah. There's probably a lot of options, but not a lot of really great Mace options. But, depending on how much you reincarnate your regular Macherie, that might actually be a thing. That might actually work out for you. Anyways, those are just kind of the job VCs that are going to be coming into their own and that are going to be becoming sustainable by having a full PvP spread in the next 4 months. So if you're excited for teams or units that use those VCs, that might be kind of an alternate way about thinking about them. So first of all, I want to propose, and kind of what I'm looking at from JP, and maybe I am potentially misinterpreting things. I mean, again, things could change for global. Things could be different. Things could be different just because we had 4 months heads up, the same way it always is. That could be a big game changer. They could change the way some of these systems works. They could be more generous with shards and with scrolls early on. I don't necessarily expect that they will, though, because it still feels like it's following the same kind of clock that their stuff usually does. And again, for this video, I think I'm pulling more from my experience as a Gumi mobile games player, someone who has been involved with these games. Wow, oh man, going. How old is FFB? I should actually look this up. It's an all-in game. It was first released in Japan in 2015. The global version was released in 2016. So oh my god. I probably started playing in 2017 or 2016. And I kind of switched from Brave Exvius into War of the Visions. So I've heard a lot of people, YouTubers specifically for both games, complaining about the same tactics for 6 or 7 years now. Oh my god, I'm gonna stop thinking about dates. The point I'm trying to make here, somewhat clumsily, and the point that's filling me with a bit of dread, is that I've been playing these mobile games for a while now, and I have a lot of experience with this company, and I have a lot of reactions to kind of the general patterns that they seem to operate under, and I don't want to say that as much of what I'm about to say is based off of Brave Exvius specifically, or War of the Vision, what I'm talking about today is based more on my experiences with War of the Visions. It has been a while since I played Brave Exvius, which I guess is going to come up. I'm not entirely sure what 105 is going to be completely honest with you, because I know I promised. So Gumi Economics 105 is going to be about Square Enix symbiosis and NFTs. You ever regret saying something like right after you say it? I know I promised that the next episode was going to be about their NFT project, but that NFT project is actually it's in a weird place right now, because the CEO that was so excited about it, and I'm not saying that there's any news that it's being canceled or that production is having any issues, other than I have not yet read a positive article about it. And look, I have seen a lot of NFT games that were really scammy, that were produced by companies that didn't give a shit about the video game. Okay, this is at least a video game company making an NFT game. It could absolutely be next generation cancerous garbage, absolutely. But I'm trying to keep an open mind. I don't really want to make any assumptions about symbiogenesis before it's at least released. I'm not saying I'm going to play it. I'm definitely not saying I'm going to buy an NFT for it, even if I think that, if a game really did NFTs right, I think it would be important in a fundamental way to the ludonarrative experience that you owned an NFT. And I think that if that wasn't important to the ludonarrative experience, then the game wouldn't work. Like, if I don't know, like the NFT has to be fundamental to the experience, otherwise you're just tacking. Otherwise it's a mystery box, it's a loot crate. You're just tacking this form of monetization into it. But if it is actually, for whatever reason, an integral part of your experience, okay. If that's how you want to monetize your game, if you want me to buy an NFT to represent my player character and my NFT evolves over time or something, I don't know. You know what, symbiogenesis, the biological process of two beings becoming one. I don't know what that means for NFTs, but fuck it, I am willing to at least read about it, if not try it. I think it was supposed to be like a free-to-play type experience anyways that you didn't need NFTs for. And I don't know how I feel about that, but yeah. So anyways, that's kind of the status of why I'm going to 201 instead of 105 for this episode, and I'm still not entirely sure what 105 is going to be yet, if that is going to be about symbiogenesis, because, I mean, the reason that I'm not as sure about symbiogenesis is, among other games outside of the mobile space being shut down recently, they also canceled their CEO. He is going to be replaced in June. So, I don't know, do I make it about that, or do I wait until June until this new guy comes in and actually do it then? And by June, Symbiogenesis will probably be out too. So what do I do in the meantime? I don't know. I guess I start 200 level Gumi Economics. Anyways, that was, even for me and for this series, an excessively long preamble. The thing that I want to express in this video is kind of an expansion of 101. In 101, I proposed a kind of 3-month cycle that happens with new releases. And I think that a 3-month cycle is accurate depending on how you want to look at this. And the way that I was looking at that is, how long is it going to take a relatively casual player, one that is still theoretically getting all the free bonus viz and all the free shards and has a good game plan, but like, how long is it going to take for those kind of casual players to actually relatively feasibly be able to have 3 140 units? Not necessarily 3 brand new 140 units, maybe awaken 2 units that they already have at 120 and get 1 brand new 140. How long is that going to take? But you would also be right to say that one part of the reincarnation system, really the part that people have an issue with, because honestly, if it weren't for the amount of reincarnations that you have to go through to get to max stats, actually this would be a far less resource intensive system than even the EXing was. There's a lot less like different currencies involved anyways. There's basically just 2 or 3 NJP. So it's not even that intensive a system until you get into that number of reincarnations to get max stats. Which, if that's your goal, if that is, you know, when people have made it, I think it might be more realistic to look at that as a 6-month cycle. And I think that there's also kind of reflections of this same type of thinking and rollout time schedule within other parts of the game. Like in the video that I recently did where I was talking about kind of an examination of the next 4 months of the meta, what might come a couple months after that, or what has come in the months prior to where we're at right now, kind of taking that 4-month window and extending it 2 months in one direction to make it a 6-month window. I was able to kind of show how certain things like threshold heals have now hit a point of abundance, a point of having made it, having been common. A point that we're roughly halfway to. You know, we don't have that many brawlers yet. I don't know if you would call Slime a brawler. But we have Perrine, I guess, that has like a mid-heal, threshold heal. Other than that, for us, it's mainly tanks. I mean, there are some other exceptions. But we don't get to the point where this has become such a common and not special ability that a bunch of units have it until relatively later in the game. You don't start seeing a bunch of brawlers having this ability until, you know, Reagan and other units like that. Other newer units also have threshold heals in their kit. And, you know, that is kind of proliferated over a span of about 6 months to a point where it's just kind of an accepted thing that you look for in a new unit's kit, especially if they're leaning bulky, you know, whereas you used to look for maybe Immortal Spirit on a sub-job or something, now you're looking for maybe a threshold heal or a 2-cast Immortal Spirit with some extra buff on it, if it's a tank. I mean, our expectations of units have changed over time, and that's kind of how the meta works. And then I kind of highlighted some trends that are at also different spaces within their 6-month cycle. You know, that 6-month cycle really starting from the introduction of the abilities. So for Yuffie, that 6-month clock is going to start on the ability to ignore Sure Hit for 3 turns, which, after having watched a couple fights with it, you know, aggro units don't necessarily reapply their buffs very well, so, I mean, it's definitely tricky. It's definitely a boon to evasion, but is it going to even make the characters that have it unhittable with guaranteed hit? Briefly, I think, is the answer to that. And, you know, briefly is better than not, but, yeah. Anyways, we're going to start seeing more characters, and really, JP's only 3 months away from that. So they haven't hit the 6-month part of that window. That's probably when we're going to see, like, Elena and other units getting these type of abilities. But, you know, 3 months from now for JP is probably when you're really going to see a lot of units starting to get that. And then on a slightly different clock, I think this clock would be about a month behind, so maybe 4 months ahead in JP, you're going to start seeing units like Brawlers and probably some more job-based vision cards for a couple other weapon types that have elemental chaining resistance up, because I think that's kind of like the next big thing that's happening. And right now, just like with Threshold Heals, kind of starting with Snow and, again, Slime being kind of an odd example, but right there at a similar time. We're also seeing this ability first on tanks, and eventually we're going to see it on brawlers, and then eventually we're just going to kind of see it on a little bit of everybody as just kind of a survivability thing that we start to assume that people are probably going to have. So in this way, a lot of things are kind of rolled out within this similar 3-month, 6-month structure to where you're about halfway there in 3 months, and then it's kind of become commonplace, and because of its supply within the meta, two things happen. And usually about maybe halfway through this cycle, something happens that starts to mitigate it. So it starts to get kind of a counter. Let's say if defense breaks had been really common, you start to see defense debuff resistance. And then if defense debuff resistance becomes really common, then DPS units are going to start having defense penetration. And then if defense penetrate... Well, there is no defense penetration resistance. I don't know. Is there defense I don't think there is. Like, I don't think that we've gotten quite that far on that yet. You know, but, you know, once defense penetration starts to become really common, then units are going to start to rely on resistances or just overall HP or other survivability gimmicks or barriers or whatever. And then you're going to start seeing, you know, as soon as people start relying on barriers, 3 months later, you're going to start seeing all of our DPSs are going to start coming with a barrier breaker. And then by 6 months, we will expect and we will actively comment on a DPS not having a barrier breaker as being kind of behind the times or being missing something. You know, that's kind of how these things roll out, and that's how the power creep happens. And I think that it's actually I don't think that the power creep is nearly as calculated or measured for Final Fantasy Brave Exvius, and I don't think that Final Fantasy Brave Exvius had to be, because if you've noticed, I've probably throughout this video been playing what appears to be Final Fantasy XIV in the background, and they're just selling stuff. This is a video of a British YouTuber breaking the Final Fantasy XIV economy, basically by doing what I used to do with spice trading in Spore. Like, this is just... It's a really good example of, like, differential trading, and, you know, there's actually a lot of market concepts that this demonstrates really well. Some that would be probably kind of illegal if they were being practiced in real life would kind of turn certain individuals like Mr. Crow into a cartel. But, you know, it's just a video game, so it's cool. But, watching this video kind of made me realize a fundamental thing about video games. See, apparently, and this is the premise for this particular video, which I'm finally explaining after you've undoubtedly been watching it in the background for quite some time, is that WoW. What is WoW? I want to say, like, fucking War of Wizards. What the fuck, man? That's not... That's by Blizzard. World of Warcraft. For fuck's sake, why'd that take so long? Apparently, World of Warcraft has seen better days, and the primary MMORPG of recent times has been Final Fantasy XIV, which means that there are a lot of former WoW players that are kind of taking the mindset and kind of gameplay styles that they learned and got so used to in WoW, and they are kind of porting these over to communities within Final Fantasy XIV. And what this means is that there are essentially very PvP heavy servers that have very strange economic idiosyncrasies, and it kind of made me realize the differences between the server on which they were selling their items for a great markup and the other servers, the more casual, more Final Fantasy player servers of people who were kind of holistically playing the game instead of grinding it for PvP. They were playing it as a PvE and PvP experience, whereas the WoW players were playing it purely as a PvP experience. Final Fantasy Brave Exvius was a PvE experience, and when weird power creep or power dynamics completely just went out the window from one week to the next, it wasn't that big a deal necessarily, because, you know, they could just make bigger PvE bosses and it would be fine. There wasn't like an intricate player versus player. I mean, there was an arena system, but it was absolute garbage, and it really never made sense, and the meta there was so completely different, and you never needed the best characters, you just needed the cheesiest characters because of its very specific rules. It was a weird system. They never put much effort into PvP. It's not a PvP game. Whereas a lot of times, War of the Visions feels like the exact opposite of that, where a lot of this game is PvP. That is where a lot of the thought and the balance is intended, and the PvE experience is just kind of there to serve as a way to get resources to hoard for PvP. And I feel like there's slightly different dynamics between the players and the economy that are created within a PvP-centric game than are created in a PvE-centric game, or a player versus player versus man, that's kind of redundant. A player versus player system being integral to a game, as opposed to a player versus enemy system being integral to the design of a game. And one of the big differences is that if you are doing a lot more PvE, you tend to get a lot more of common resources. And in games that actually have economies, there will often become this weird, if it's a PvP focused game, there's often this weird distinction between like gold farmers and the people who are doing the PvP stuff, with the gold that was farmed by the gold farmers. And effectively, they are paying the gold farmers to win, even if there wasn't necessarily the intention of making this a pay-to-win game. The introduction of PvE and the introduction of a PvP system that encourages us to compete with other human opponents just encourages in some people the single-minded dedication to combat, to the point where they no longer want to farm resources, and to the point where they are willing to pay other people to get those resources for them. This is a thing that we've seen in multiplayer online, massively multiplayer online games for quite some time, as a matter of fact. It's just, I don't know, maybe it only makes sense that eventually the companies would have gotten in on selling those things, that certain whale class was paying some gold farmer in a poor, starved country where all they could afford was a laptop and their only job opportunity in the whole wide world was to farm gold on World of the Visions. War of Worldcraft. Oh my god, that's terrible. Anyways, I guess what I realized is there feels like there's this dynamic that is especially pronounced in PvP games, not only towards competitiveness amongst the player base, but also this sort of reduction of the game into overly simplistic and well-defined metas, just because people will talk about strategy forever on the internet. Also, you could say that we optimize the fun out of games. By giving yourself the arbitrary goal of making 400 million gil over a weekend by buying all of the milk in an entire data center across many servers to raise the prices of all of the crafted goods, of all of the crafted in-game foods, because you also run a cartel that owns all of the crafters that make those foods, and you're giving them a steady drip of milk, and they're selling their things at insane prices, and you're selling the milk at insane prices, and it's all working because you own all of the milk. I'm just saying that there is a weird deprioritization of the game as it is traditionally known in PvP games, where the most fit players often, or the most wealthy players at the very least, will often, if they can't pay the game, will literally pay other players to gather resources for them so that they can just focus on being really good at PvP. It's almost a weird form of sponsorship, I don't know, or modern digital serfdom. It is pretty peculiar, but and it's also weird, this video in particular really emphasized the economic differences that are kind of inherent to a PvP versus a PvE focused mindset and player base. And I just thought that was pretty interesting. I don't know. So, Gumi works in 6-month cycles, and PvP games are tend to be more play to win because, for whatever reason, if you have money, competing against real people instead of just designed bosses, but actual other people, really encourages us to spend more money to be good. There's probably a psychological lesson to be learned there. Anyways, this video is probably already way too long as it is, so I'm gonna cut it there and see you in the next one. And I just want to say at the end of this, as I usually have been saying a lot in the beginning of these videos, that I really appreciate people tuning in to watch or to listen to the economic musings of a video game player. I really appreciate it because it is certainly worth talking about or acknowledging. So I'm glad that you're willing to participate in that, because there can't be a discourse if it's just me standing on a soapbox. So thank you for being an audience to that.